There's a chimpanzee named Santino living at a zoo in Sweden. Every morning before the zoo opens, he walks the perimeter of his enclosure and collects rocks. He piles them up, hides them behind logs, tucks them under hay. Then the visitors arrive, and Santino throws the rocks at them. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is what researchers noticed when they watched the footage carefully. Santino would stop collecting rocks the moment a keeper walked by. He'd act normal, calm, unbothered. Then the keeper would leave and he'd go right back to building his arsenal. He wasn't just planning ahead. He was concealing that he was planning ahead. That's not an instinct, that's a lie. And it raises a question that sounds almost absurd until you start pulling on it. Can animals actually deceive? Not just accidentally mislead, but genuinely intend to create a false belief in another mind. Start with what deception actually requires. To deceive someone, you need to understand that they have a mind, that their mind contains beliefs, that those beliefs can be different from reality, and that you can manipulate what goes into their mind to get something you want. That's called theory of mind, and for a long time, scientists thought it was exclusively human. Then the research started coming in. In the 1980s, a researcher named Daniel Povinelli ran a series of experiments with chimpanzees. A chimp watched as food was hidden in one of several containers. Then two humans entered the room. One had been in the room and knew where the food was. One hadn't and didn't. The chimp could point to a container to get it opened. Which human did they point to? They pointed to the one who knew, consistently. They weren't just pointing randomly. They understood that knowledge lived inside specific minds, and that some minds had information others didn't. That's not a small thing. That's the cognitive foundation that makes lying possible. Great apes are the obvious place to start, but they're not the most interesting. Consider the fork-tailed drongo, a small black bird found across sub-Saharan Africa. Drongos are famous in behavioral ecology for one specific reason. They're liars, professionally. Here's how it works. A drongo will follow a meerkat or a ground squirrel as it forages. When the meerkat finds food, the drongo gives a false alarm call, the exact call that means predator nearby. The meerkat drops the food and runs. The drongo swoops in and eats it. That would already be remarkable, but it gets stranger. Researchers discovered that drongos don't use the same false alarm call every time. They rotate through different calls, mimicking the alarm calls of other species, so the meerkats don't habituate to the trick. If one call stops working, they switch to another. If the meerkats start ignoring a particular sound, the drongo adapts. A bird is running an active deception campaign and updating its tactics in real time based on whether its targets are catching on. The question researchers kept asking was, does the drongo know it's lying? Or is it just producing a call that happens to result in food? The honest answer is that we can't fully separate those two things yet. But what we can say is that the behavior shows flexibility, context sensitivity, and adaptation to the mental state of the target. Those are the same features that define intentional deception in humans. Octopuses are harder to dismiss. Octopuses have no social life. They're solitary animals. They don't have the evolutionary pressure to deceive members of their own species the way social animals do. And yet they do something that researchers still struggle to explain cleanly. When a small male octopus wants to approach a female that's being guarded by a larger male, he doesn't fight. He changes. He pulls his arms in, flattens his body, and shifts his skin pattern to mimic a female octopus. He walks past the guarding male, gets close to the female, and then drops the disguise. He impersonated a female to get past a rival. That requires representing his own appearance as something it's not. It requires understanding that the guarding male is making decisions based on what he perceives. And it requires maintaining the performance until the deception has served its purpose. Whether there's anything it feels like to be an octopus doing this, we genuinely don't know. Their nervous system is so different from ours that applying human frameworks to their cognition is itself a kind of mistake. But the behavior is there, documented, repeatable, and very difficult to explain without something that functions like intentional misdirection. Dogs are where this gets personal. You probably assume your dog is incapable of lying to you. They're too loyal, too transparent, too purely themselves. And for the most part, that's true. But researchers have documented something that complicates the picture. In a 2017 study, dogs were given the opportunity to lead either a cooperative human or an uncooperative human to hidden food. The cooperative human would share the food. The uncooperative human would keep it. Dogs quickly learned to lead the uncooperative human to an empty container while guiding the cooperative one to the real food. They were deliberately misleading one human to protect a resource. Not by accident, not through conditioning alone. They understood what the human wanted, they knew where the real food was, and they chose to send that particular human somewhere else. Your dog, the one currently sleeping in the most inconvenient possible location, is capable of strategic deception when it's in their interest. The spectrum runs from the drongo's false alarm calls to Santino hiding rocks to an octopus wearing a disguise to a dog deciding which human deserves the truth. And across all of it, the common thread is the same. Deception requires modeling another mind. It requires understanding that someone else has beliefs that can be shaped, and it requires acting on that understanding to get something you want. For decades, we treated that capacity as the thing that separated us, the cognitive line between human and animal. You could build a ladder of intelligence, put humans at the top, and point to theory of mind as proof. The animals didn't get the memo. Corvids deserve their own chapter in this story. Ravens and crows don't just remember faces, they play social chess. In the wild, ravens cache food. They hide it for later. But they also steal from each other's caches. And this creates a problem. If you've watched another raven watching you hide your food, you know your cache is at risk. What ravens do next is what keeps researchers up at night. If a raven knows it was observed hiding food, it will go back and move the cache to a new location, in secret, while the observer isn't looking. But here's the part that's hard to explain. Ravens only do this if they themselves have experience stealing from others. If a raven has never stolen another bird's cache, it doesn't seem to understand that being watched is a threat. Only ravens that know how theft works from the thief's perspective seem to grasp that being observed creates vulnerability. They're projecting their own intentions onto another mind. A raven that has stolen food understands that other ravens are capable of the same thought process, and it acts on that understanding preemptively. That's not just theory of mind, that's theory of mind applied recursively. Understanding what someone else might be thinking about what you might be thinking. That level of cognitive nesting shows up in developmental psychology as a milestone in human children around age 4 or 5. Ravens get there too. And then there's what happens when the deception fails. Chimpanzees caught in a lie don't just stop. They double down, they redirect, they distract. Frans de Waal, the primatologist who spent decades studying chimp social dynamics, documented case after case of chimps managing the social fallout of getting caught, hiding their expressions, physically turning away so others couldn't read their faces. One chimp was observed using its hand to push the corners of its own mouth down, suppressing a fear grin so others wouldn't see it was nervous. They know that their face communicates information, and they know how to manage what that information says. That is not an animal operating on instinct. That is an animal managing its own self-presentation in real time based on what it believes others are reading. Which brings us back to the question that started all of this. Can animals lie? The cleaner answer is that the animals we've been studying aren't really asking our permission. They developed the cognitive tools for deception long before we developed the tools to study them. The drongo was running misdirection campaigns across the African savanna millions of years before anyone gave it a name. The octopus was impersonating females before humans existed to be impressed by it. Santino was hiding rocks from zoo visitors before behavioral researchers were there to notice. We didn't discover that animals could lie. We just finally started paying close enough attention to see it. What the research keeps showing is that the cognitive machinery required for deception, the ability to model minds, to track beliefs, to adapt behavior based on what another creature thinks they know, showed up in evolution long before we did. It showed up in birds with brains smaller than a walnut, in cephalopods whose nervous systems are nothing like ours, in great apes who figured out that some minds have information others don't, and that this gap is exploitable. The question isn't whether animals can lie. Some of them are remarkably good at it. The question is what that tells us about the minds doing the lying. Because a mind capable of deception is a mind that understands other minds exist. That's not nothing. That might be everything. The next time your dog gives you those eyes and you feel absolutely certain they're telling you the truth, remember that they've been watching you for 15,000 years. They know exactly what expression works on you, and they know how to use it.